Good afternoon, everybody. MMBA Madurai has got a lot of subcommittees, and one such committee is English Literary Committee. Our chairman is Senior Advocate N. Krishnaveni, and the General Secretary is Mr. N. Ilango. Krishnaveni ma'am is bereaved. Her father died recently, so she couldn't attend the function today. Ilango is also unavailable. So the committee is given full independence to conduct the proceedings. So far, we have conducted 4 programs. This is the last and final program which we are conducting through the Zoom. And the topic is something unique, and later it will be explained to you. So may I now request Ms. Lakshmi Prasanna to commence the proceedings and to welcome the gathering.
Good evening all. The meeting is called to order. I thank all of you for joining us for today's webinar, Legalese. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome you all for today's webinar. Before I go any further, I would like to welcome Honorable Mr. Justice Jagadish Chandra, Advocate Mr. S. Rajendra Kumar, today's speaker, the President of MMBA, General Secretary of MMBA, the Chairman of English Literary Committee, the Coordinator of English Literary Committee, the members of English Literary Committee, and the participants. I'll pass on the forum to the English Literary Committee Chairman.
May I now request Honorable Justice Jagadish Chandra to formally inaugurate the session and to deliver his presidential address. So you can now commence the.
All glory to God Almighty. Good evening, everybody. We are now almost in the 86th day of the initial lockdown. All of us in the midst of the pandemic are really clueless when it will come to an end. It is really a very difficult situation for all of us. The coronavirus COVID-19 is a great leveler which strictly adheres to Article 14, that is equality. It does not care about who we are and what we are. It does not care about our differences in religion, caste, creed, color, ideology, or our status in the society. It does not care whether you are rich or poor, young or old, whether you are a leader or a follower, whether you are an atheist or a believer, celebrity or a common man, whether you belong to A party, B party or C party. It does not care whether you are a migrant worker or a guest worker. It has not left any one particular group untouched. This is an attack on all of us as mankind, and it calls all of us to unite together to fight it back on all fronts. Mankind, over the annals of history, has fought and survived many plagues and natural calamities and wars. In this age of technology and communication that we live, we are able to see magnitude of the pandemic live, and it's very, very disturbing. It is indeed a very hard time, and the hard time has brought out so many good things and bad things from everybody, including institutions and individuals. We have seen good things from institutions and bad things from institutions, and we have seen good things from individuals and bad things from individuals. Let us keep the bad things aside. Considering the good things, we are able to see the greatness of doctors, health workers, paramedics, police, executives, and etc., who have been tirelessly working in the forefront, risking their own lives like soldiers on the war front. We have also seen the sacrifice and magnanimity of people like the hairdresser Thiru Mohan from Madurai, who has spent the entire money he saved for his daughter's education for feeding the poor and hungry. His sacrifice has shown that it is not the status or wealth we have. We only need to have a heart to help others. Though the sufferings of our legal community is not less when compared to so many others who died on their way back home, we are blessed better. During this crisis, I suggest you to do some random act of kindness to someone who is less fortunate than us. It can be small and maybe even very insignificant for some, but for the person you are helping, it might matter much. It could be even a word of consolation or encouragement. During the initial days of lockdown, I happened to read a good article written by my beloved brother, Justice Anand Venkadeshan, on introspection. It was indeed a thought-provoking one. During these times, I was able to analyze myself, and I was also able to find out my strength and my shortcomings. Apart from attending to my other official work, I had this opportunity of lockdown to reconcile and reconnect. I have used these days to spend quality time with my octogenarian mother and my siblings and other family members. I took this time to connect with my teachers who taught me in primary school. I also took this time to connect with my friends who were my classmates in primary school. My teachers are elderly and are retired now. My formative education was from a rural school in down south of Tamil Nadu. The teachers there have done a lot in shaping me and molding me for what I am today. It was truly a joy reconnecting with my teachers. The feeling being mutual, the expression of gratitude gave them much happiness and good comfort. When things remain so, on the professional front, as members of the legal community, the times had been very, very tough for us, isn't it? Irrespective of age and experience, both seniors and juniors have found the time to be really tough and hard. Having been with you till few years back, I am aware of the situation. We are going through a rough patch, and right now, things really look rough and challenging without any end. I can say, though the situation for lawyers as such is tough, there are people from other walks of life whose situations are tougher. I know most of you will be worried about what we are going to do after. But I can tell you with belief and hope that things will not remain the same. Psalms 35 in the Holy Bible says, when there is weeping in the night, there will be joy in the morning. Yes, there will be joy in the morning. Only thing is, we have to hold on with faith and belief. I can assure you that our present condition is not our conclusion. Yes, we can bounce back when things get all right. It will be a different situation altogether, and we will be going to face different situations altogether. Don't ever give up and don't lose confidence. We will rise back stronger and better. We will be more united and we will bounce back with courage and confidence. Having held on so long, we will hold on and fight back in the interest of our institution and society at large. As members of the legal community, we, despite the odds, have not lagged behind in putting our foot forward to respond to the call of our constitution to perform our duties. Last Saturday, we had a program in the Judicial Academy, and the statistics provided has shown that despite several odds, we have been able to do some considerable judicial work. Our judges in the High Court, judges in the district judiciary, advocates, registry, and court staff have tirelessly worked, taking health risks to make the administration of justice moving on. I'm sure we will beat all odds. With these words of encouragement for all of us, let me get into the subject of the day. Mr. Raghavan had been asking me to participate in one of the webinars. I have been giving excuses for quite some time. But when he told me the name of the speaker, I could not resist further. The speaker, Mr. S. Rajendra Kumar, you can call him SRK, like our Shah Rukh Khan, SRK, is an erudite lawyer and a person with a lot of knowledge in law, the language of law and legalese. He is a globetrotter with varied experience. I have the privilege of knowing him for quite some time. He has a joyful countenance and he can lighten your moods in any stressful situation with his great sense of humor. Whenever I see him in the corridors during my days as a lawyer, I have not resisted the temptation of stopping and hearing a joke from him, and that keeps you stress-free for the rest of the day. Mr. Rajendra Kumar, are you there? He is a fountain of humor. Like how Shah Rukh Khan movies, he makes the situation around him joyful. Mr. Rajendra Kumar also makes the same aura around him. He is a fountain of humor. The special talents of Mr. SRK can be reserved for another day. It can be even a program on humor. Mr. Raghavan, please take note of it.
I took note of it immediately.
I understand that he has also prepared much, and he's a very person who's knowledgeable in legalese, and he has also worked much on it. Now, coming to the topic legalese, I'm going to give an overview of legalese under the following head. What is legalese? History of legalese, definition of legalese, why legal profession persists with legalese even though English for the rest of the world has changed. And the fifth heading is that what does the common man or litigant other than a person connected with the legal profession say about legalese? And the last one is what is the present global trend in the legal circles with regard to legalese? The topic of today is legalese, the formal and technical language of legal professionals. As the topic suggests, the meaning of legalese is the kind of English used in legal writing and legal proceedings. Legal English has been referred as a sub-language since it is not a normal language which we use in our normal conversations and communications, and it differs from our ordinary English which we use in our day-to-day communication and our conversation. For easy understanding of legalese, I am using these two terms which is being now commonly used in our courts. One is that habeas corpus. We can always easily say a direction for protection of someone under detention before the court. And for a mandamus, we can say to command to do or perform a statutory duty. But if you ask a layman, he may not be knowing what is a habeas corpus. And if you ask for a person what is mandamus, he may not be knowing it. Like I can tell you in a lighter sense, I can tell you a motion in a court is different, and a motion in a clinical laboratory, it is something. So the term legalese used only by the lawyers is a term associated with a traditional style of legal writing that may be cluttered, wordy, indirect, and may include unnecessary technical words or phrases. There are few categories for these legalese. They are characterized by doublets or triplets, and which are also consequences of mixing of languages. English with its law vocabulary has evolved with borrowing of words from other languages like Latin, Old English, Medieval English, Old French, Latin, and French. This borrowal of words and usage was done with an intent and belief that the mixture of words with same meaning from different languages would add clarity. But I do not know whether it adds clarity or confusion. It is for the reader to know. For example, the words like null and void. Null is a Latin word and void is a old French word. Will and testament. Will is an old English word and testament is a Latin word. Like you can say that matrimony, marriage. So these things are also, they come from different languages. Like fit and proper. Fit is an old English word and the proper is a French word. Like that save and accept. French and Latin. It was also done with a intent of making more emphasis, adding more emphasis on the language. The habit extended to using two words from the same language also. For example, pairs of old English words have been used like have and hold, from and after, let or hindrance, each and every, and the habit is prevalent even today. Yet another characteristics of legalese is usage of long sentences and lack of punctuations. In olden days, communications were mostly oral. And since there was no means for mechanical production of the scripts, so like you did not have a printing machine those days. So thereby everything was recorded by hand in parchment papers, like the old tracing papers we have. And at the time, Greek and Latin words were written by hand, and they carried only signs for the reader to take a breath in between. And thereby the sentences were without punctuations and they had to be really lengthy. The other characteristics of legalese are unusual word order. For example, I will read you a sentence. The provisions for termination hereinafter appearing or will, at the cost of the borrower, comply with the same. If you ask an ordinary man on the market, he may not be able to understand what it is. Likewise, yet another special characteristics of legalese are usage of unfamiliar proforms. For example, the same, the said, the aforesaid, the aforementioned, etc. Usage of pronominal adverbs like hereof, thereof, and whereof were also used primarily to avoid repeating the names or phrases. At the same time, usage of words ending e, r, o, r, ee, like employer, employee, lessor, lessee, they were also used. Other phrasal verbs like enter into, put down, serve upon, write off, and similar things were also used. Now, we will come to the history of legalese. Why these languages are mixed, how it came into practice, these things now we are going to see. History of law dates back to almost 3000 BC. Before Christ, 3000 BC, we had the courts and we have the system of law and justice. Coming to the language of law, due to the adoption of common law practice in most of the countries and usage of English throughout the world, English has become the language of law today. Almost in all the countries throughout the world, English is being used as a language of law. Over some 700 years of legal history, English as language of law has developed through waxing and waning of different languages and their influences. For example, these are the languages: Celtic, Norman, Latin, and French. Legal language and legal traditions have changed with the influences of conquests and conquerors. Like in India, when the Muslim rulers conquered India, we had the Sharia courts also in India at that time. So like that, there was influence of the conquests and conquerors in the language. In prehistoric Britain, the traditional common law was Celtic law. After the conquest of Britain by the Romans in AD 43, Britain was under Roman influence and thereby it followed Roman legal traditions, and obviously the legal language was Latin at that time. After the departure of Romans from Britain and the invasion of Germans, there was the influence of Anglo-Saxon, that is the Old English. Then came the law of Ethelbert. Later, following the invasion of Normans, they invaded in 1066. After the invasion of Normans in 1066, Anglo-Norman French became the official language of legal proceedings in England for a period of about 300 years until the Pleadings in English Act 1362 was enacted. And as such, Anglo-Norman French continued to be in use for 300 years. During the same period, due to the influence of the church, medieval Latin was also used for written records, and side by side, some English technical terms were also used. Anglo-Norman influence brought in French language, from which many words in modern legal English have derived. Thus, French had an enduring influence on the general linguistic register of the modern legal English, which is in vogue today. In 1362, Statutes of Pleading was enacted, and it stated that all legal proceedings should be conducted in English. However, French and Latin words remain to be used, and that explains the reason for the usage of French words like property, estate, chattel, lease, executor, and tenant, and at the same time, Latin words like ad hoc, de facto, bona fide, mala fide, inter alia, and ultra vires were used in legal writing, and we are using it till date. At the same time, during the medieval period, lawyers used mixture of French and English and many other distinctive and exclusive Latin words as language of law. For example, ab initio, ex parte, res judicata, quid pro quo. And as stated earlier, they are used in the form of doublets. Like breaking is English and entering is French, fit and proper, English and French, will and testament, English and Latin. Only from the beginning of the 13th century, literacy was catching up in England with common people learning English language. Till such time, it was only almost, it was like a spoken and there was no literacy. People do not, even English people, they didn't know to read English. Only from the beginning of the 13th century, literacy was catching up in England with common people learning the language. And in 1650, the Act for turning the books of law and all process and proceedings in the Court of Justice into English was brought about. As usual, since the legal profession continued to be the preserve of elites, despite attempt to enforce use of English, Latin and French remained as language of law to maintain the exclusivity. English as the language of law started getting prominence only from the beginning of the 18th century, with Latin and Frenching towing along English even till date. Due to paucity of time, I do not want to elaborate further on the history of legalese, and I'm sure the speaker of the day, Mr. SRK, will throw more light on it. Now, coming to the fourth point, why legal profession persists with the legalese, even though the English for the rest of the world has changed. I'm only giving some bullet points why our community persists that legalese should be a language. So it is because that we have become slaves to precedents. It was like that in those days, and we follow that. And all along it had been like this, so it has to be like this. We use it because it is already there. And yet another complaint against lawyers is that lawyers are conservative, cautious, who do what was done before solely because it was done before. To sound like a lawyer and differentiate them from common man. See, they use the legalese for the purpose of differentiating them from common man and to project themselves as somebody special and distinct, to get the respect of peers and judges. Lawyers also take a different saying that legalese is tools of trade and a lawyer has to use them at any cost for maintaining the secrecy of the trade. Stuart Orbach, a legal correspondent of the Washington Post, once said, legalese serve as a secret handshake in a fraternity, letting others know you are one of the tribe. I'll read it once again. Legalese served as a secret handshake in a fraternity, letting others know you are one of the tribe. Another legal scholar has said that legalese is the specialized vocabulary that reinforces the group feeling among members. Legal style and the vocabulary of lawyers are indispensable for the cohesiveness and the prestige of the profession. Yet another reason for lawyers to hang on to legalese is verbosity and lack of desire to improve or change. To make a honest confession myself, with the advent of computers and software, we as a community, not alone lawyers, judges have also become lazy, and we are adapting to the mode of copy, cut and paste. Of course, when meeting friends from the other profession, they have even joked to me saying that lawyers use legalese either to sound smart or justify charging higher fees. Now the fifth point, coming to the we as a tribe may have pride using legalese. But what does a common man or litigant, other than a person connected to the legal profession, say about legalese? Will Rogers, a famous actor and a columnist, once said, he was an actor and a columnist of the 1920s. He said, the minute you read something and you can't understand it, you can almost be sure that it was drawn by a lawyer. Then, if you give it to another lawyer to read it and he don't know just what it means, then you can be sure it was drawn up by a lawyer. If it's in a few words and is plain and understandable, only way it was written by a non-lawyer. Every time a lawyer writes something, he is not writing for posterity. He is writing so that endless others of his craft can make a living out of trying to figure out what he said. So endlessly somebody has to find out what was the intention of the scribe. In a lighter thing, few weeks later, Mr. Roger died in an air crash, and put it in a lighter vein that no lawyer or lawyer body claimed any responsibility for his death. Jonathan Swift, you must have read the book Gulliver's Travel when we were young. When we were young, we have read that Gulliver's Travel. Jonathan Swift is a Anglo-Irish writer. He's a very, very prominent writer. He has written so many novels. And he said about legally saying that this is as lawyers speaking in cant and jargon of their own, and no other mortal can understand what they are writing. Now, referring to other humorous quotes on legalese, one of the quotes says, legalese is the language of lawyers that they would not otherwise use in ordinary communication, but for the fact that they are lawyers. Another quote goes like this: legalese is a word or phrase that a lawyer might use in drafting a contract and pleading, but could not use in conversation with his wife. This is what's said. In general, legalese is frowned upon, being cluttered, wordy, and indirect. Very complicated sentence structures which are impersonal, outdated, passive voice, double negatives, and filled with jargons. Now, these are the negative things said about legalese. Coming to the last point, what is the present trend the world over with regard to legalese? The trend today is, as you know, legalese versus plain language. There is criticism for the language of law. Statistics say that the support for the use of plain language in law is increasing world over in the community of legal experts. And discussions are also going on how to change things for better. The number of proponents of plain language movement is increasing day by day. One of the great judges and proponents of simple English, Lord Denning, said, "Don't use long words unless your hearers or readers understand them. You may understand them yourself, but they may not. If your hearers say to himself, 'That is a word I have never heard before,' what does it mean? You have failed. If your readers say, 'I must look it up in the dictionary,' again, you have failed. You have not conveyed your meaning to him." A lot of speakers and writers do not appreciate this simple truth. They use long words so as to show off. This is the lamentation of our great judge, Lord Denning. David Malinkoff, a successful lawyer in America and a professor of law at the University of California and a crusader for plain language, wrote, "Most law can be expressed in ordinary English. Most of it is. But by the time lawyers get through mushing up ordinary English, very few English speakers and only some lawyers can recognize it. They throw in words that were headaches before the age of steam. They try to get by stuffing law into sentences that aren't built to take the load. Instead of rejecting the rubbish and keeping the food in the language of law, they swallow it whole and end up with law sick." That is what said about legalese by, he's also a great writer, David Malinkoff. He's a famous lawyer in America. In India also, the movement of plain language is taking up. Organizations like Vidhi and Nyaya are taking forward the movement of plain language, and the Society of Indian Law Firms is also supporting the promotion of plain language. Recently, I happened to read an article titled "Lawyers Speak Legalese for a Reason," written by an attorney named Bo Bingham. He had stated that using Latin words can greatly simplify things, since the judges exactly know what the phrases mean and there is less room for imaginative interpretation. He had given an illustration and he had referred to two Latin words. One is per stripes and per capita. And as I said, he had also given an illustrative case how usage of these words made the intent of the testator of a will perfectly clear, leaving little room for arguments over interpretation. He had also given an illustration saying that a lady, she had left will to her 3 sons, and one of her son predeceased her. And he had given an example saying that if the will had stated it is per capita, then after her death, the properties have to be shared equally among the 2 surviving sons. If it is stated per stripes, it gives a clear meaning that the property has to be given to the 2 sons as well as the legal heirs of the deceased son. So he said, he had pointed out that though legal is frustrating, it is sometimes serves the very, very important purpose. Now a time has come where the entire world around is seeking for transparency in everything. Consumer movements throughout the world advocate that lawyers should be more transparent and they should educate the common man what they are doing. Like how we ask our doctors and medical professional to tell us the entire history of us and what he is going to do and what is the nature of. See, like when we get offended when somebody asks us too many questions, you must also understand when you go to doctors, they also get the same feeling when we ask too many questions. So this is how the now world wants everything to be very transparent, and a time has come, we will have to be very, very transparent. In my opinion, we do as a community need to do some thorough research and examination to make the language of law simple so as to make the common man understand and accept it, but without compromising the majesty of law and the profession. நல்லதை வச்சுப்போம், தேவையில்லாத விட்டுருவோம். Either that we'll have to do a research and find out what is all good, what are the terms which can be used, which makes things easier for our community, which makes things easier for the society, and we will leave which is clustered, which is not understandable things, we will leave it. Now I hand over the session to Mr. SRK, Mr. S. Rajendra Kumar. Before that, I should tell you that the subject may look dry, but I'm sure that the speaker with this knowledge in the subject and sense of humor will make the session lively, which will be of benefit to juniors and seniors as well. I thank MMBA, Mr. Srinivasa Raghavan and his team for providing me the opportunity to preside over this function. Knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. MMBA and Mr. Srinivasan and his team deserve great praise and appreciation for doing yeoman and wonderful service to the legal community. Thank you once again. Hope you will enjoy this session.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I would rather say that this is the most befitting presidential address I ever had in the recent past. Because I think you have done a mini research before delivering the welcome address, I think the inaugural address. And it is not an empty formality. The amount of work you have done is something I appreciate as chairman of the English Literary Committee. And I'm happy that I have only requested a fittest person to give a speech by inaugurating the session. Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Before going to the session and the what is called the master of the ceremony, Lakshmi Prasanna, I just want to make 2 things very clear. When this subject was announced as the topic of the day, many eyebrows were raised. Why legalese? And many of the people were not even aware of the term legalese. It was something they came to know for the first time. So I would rather say that it is like blaming a doctor for writing a prescription in a most illegitimate, I think, what is called a way which is something not able to be understood, and the handwriting is not understood by the common man. We make fun of the doctors. But the doctor said, at least we are able to convey what we write to the pharmacist who is able to read. But what you lawyers write is not able to understand by anybody except the lawyers. And this is the lighter way of saying things. In fact, when my daughter was in a younger age, I used to say, Shweta, I want to go early because today I have a lunch motion. She said, Dad, how can you have lunch and motion together? That was the comment she made. So this is the way in which our legal jargons are being looked into by persons who are not in the field. So as Lordship has rightly said, bona fide, mala fide, or good faith, bad faith can easily be substituted with bona fide and mala fide. But the time has come to know that we use all the Latin words for writs. Also, even mandamus it is not English, and certiorari is not an English, covenanto is not an English, and all these terms are something sounding Greek and Latin to the non-legal persons. This is the area where legal is assumes importance. At the same time, as you rightly said, without compromising on the quality and the way in which we are administering justice, there should be a movement to see that legal is achieved better. With this note, I request Lakshmi Prasanna to handle the forum.
Now I would like to introduce today's speaker, Mr. S. Rajendra Kumar. He was born on 23rd February 1970. He has completed his law degree in Dr. Ambedkar Law University. He got enrolled in the year 1993. He has 27 years of standing experience in the bar. He initially started his practice in the year 1993 under the guidance of his senior Pa and Palram and Rajan, T.K. Ramkumar, R.S. Varadarajan and Palram, Honorable Lord B. Parthiban. During the period 1994 to 1995, he was working in a Delhi-based law firm, Singhania & Co. In 1995 and 1996, he was in deepening and deepening. During 1996 to 2004, he was under late K. Emunat, the brother of Mr. K. Parasa. In the year 2004, he joined the firm Norton and Grant, started by our Honorable Lordship P. N. Prakash and Honorable Mr. Justice G. Jayachandran. He still continues in that firm. Now, as our Lordship Jagdish Chandra says much about legalese, now I don't want to explain more about legalese. As legalese means the formal and technical language of legal documents. As lawyers, it is one of the most important area which we need focus. While preparing legal documents, a lawyer tries to think all the ways a certain word or a phrase might be interpreted. With those various interpretations in mind, the lawyer drafts the document in the way most likely to avoid future misinterpretations. Unfortunately, this requires the use of more words, usually more than seem necessary, turning a one-page document into several. Legalese is one way a skilled lawyer can make a document more concise while also protecting the client from future battle word meanings. Now I invite today's resource person, Mr. Rajesh Kumar, to take over the forum and deliver his speech on today's topic, legalese. So I welcome you, sir.
Thank you. First of all, my lords, Jagdish Chandra ji, for introducing me in a very humorous way. Now, I want to remain as a very serious person in this thing. Now, the very atmosphere is very dangerous. I am reminded of one John Dryden's poem. Actually, he has translated it from Aeneid. Endure the hardships of your present state, live and reserve yourselves for better fate. This is the most apt poem we all should try to remind ourselves about. Now, coming to legalese, I have prepared some slides, screen cast, which I am going to take you all. Before that, I'll read out one poem by Shakespeare from Julius Caesar. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury legalese and not to praise it. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. Now, the lingering question that is in our minds is, have you ever wondered why we lawyers use a peculiar kind of language? This is actually taking off from what my Lord has stated now. A language which we never use in everyday conversation. I want to skip that sexist remark that we do not even use it with our own wives, but only in drafting a contract or in pleading. Do we honestly think it is uncluttered and cramped, not wordy and verbose, direct and not roundabout, not containing unnecessary technical words or phrases, and simple? And finally, is it reader friendly and comprehensible? The answer would be invariably a no with capital N. So that is the precise definition of legalis. Now there are 4 kinds of legalis: academic, which is used in law journals, universities; juridical, which is being used in court judgments; legislative, that is used in laws, regulations, treaties, contracts, etc. Court pleadings, which is our topic today. To know the answer, we have to travel nearly 1000 years. This all started with 1066 AD, when William the Conqueror led Norman conquest of England. Prior to that, many dialects were in England. Dialects of Old English were spoken by the people of England. Old English can be stated as the great granddad of modern English, which was spoken between roughly 500 AD to 1100 AD. Some examples I have given. The spelling is different, pronunciation might be different. He is his brother, that is, he is his brother. That was mean wife. Please, life is yort, even singio, os mon. Their equivalent is given in the opposite side. That was my wife. This life is short. Why is that man singing? This is the old English which were used. But when William the Conqueror came along with his nobles and followers, they spoke a language called Old Norman. In course of time, an amalgam of languages developed into a dialect known as Anglo-Norman French. It was this language that was used for the administrative purposes from 12th to 15th century AD. Incidentally, my lord has mentioned about 1362 Act. Unfortunately, that act was passed in French. So this language, Anglo-Norman, was spoken by the higher strata of people in medieval England. The other social classes also imitated the nobility, and they were keen to learn French. See, this is happening in England. Before the advent of William, as my lord pointed out, the official lingua franca was Latin, because the church was using it. Courts were also using it for record purposes. And Latin is the major language of record in legal documents for most of the medieval period. Anglo-Norman was never the main administrative language. However, from 12th to 15th century, Anglo-Norman French, or it is otherwise known as Anglo-French, was much used in law reports, charters, ordinances, and official correspondences concerning trade also. So Anglo-French became the language of kings, his courts, and upper class. And you would be really wondering to know that mother tongue of English kings is not English, but French for quite a long time, from William the Conqueror, who reigned from 1066 to 1087, till Henry IV, 1399 to 1413 he reigned. And see, for nearly 4 centuries their language was only French. And Henry IV was the first king to take oath in English, and Henry V was the first to write in English. The first truly English king to the throne after the Norman conquest was actually Henry VII, and he too was Welsh. Then there was some 100 years war going on between England and France, and with that the spirit of English nationalism started growing, and that started the death knell for French. French slowly started diminished, but from 12th century to 15th century, court was using 3 language formula. That is Latin for writing, French for oral language, that is for conducting the trials. English was used only in a less formal exchanges between judges, lawyers, complainants, and witnesses. That is the state of English in their own courts. Only in 1731 AD, this is where I differ from His Lordship. Law French was completely banished from courts of common law. This is where that just pointed out. 1362, there was a statute passed saying that all governmental and legal affairs must be conducted in English. But this curious thing is, even this enactment was written only in French. So this proves two things. Language of the government was not the language of the people. And secondly, French obviously remained the language of the law. See, even after passing of this law, for nearly 400 years, French continues to rule the courts. One more thing that is proved again is officiality does not always reflect practice. So this is the history of legalis. Now, we all know that English language has a propensity to borrow many words from many languages. Even from our own languages, that is, it has borrowed Coromandel, Juggernaut. Juggernaut is nothing but Jagannath. It grew enormously. And at the same time, law clerks were working in Chancery Division, developed one language called Chancery English, and they have set a standard called Chancery Standard. It became the seed around which early English grew. By that time, printing press also came to England in the 15th century, and two prominent printers, William Caxton and Richard Pinson, they adopted this Chancery Standard. So this Chancery Standard spread throughout the realm of England in the form of books and printed pamphlets. At that time, they regularized English spelling also, because before that, for one word, there used to be 50 spellings. So this is the chief reason for spread of Chancery English throughout England. And only in the 16th century, English really established itself as a language of record for courts. But the opinion of so many English writers were different. They thought that their own language was very rude and inadequate. Their poet laureates, John Skelton, felt in that way. John Dryden, with whose poem I started off this session, he used to write his thoughts in Latin first and then translate them into English. So he is the one who translated Aeneid from Latin to English. And this is the poem I recited at the start of this session. Durate et osmet rebus servate secundis. It roughly translates as endure and keep yourselves for days of happiness. Nothing would be more apt than this poem for the present days. Endure the hardships of your present state. Live and reserve yourselves for better fate. Now, even Shakespeare used to make fun of people who piled on highfalutin foreignisms just to sound smart. In one of his dramas, Love's Labour Lost, one character, Moth, will speak like this. They have been at a great feast of languages and stolen the scraps. To which the reply of Postard is, oh, they have lived long on the alms basket of words. I marvel thy master hath not eaten thee for a word, for thou art not so long by it as honorificabilitude nati bus. Thou art easier swallowed than a flapdragon. See this Sashi Tharoorian words. Shakespeare is the origin. This word actually means a state of being able to achieve honors. This is the longest word used in that drama. It is a word with alternating consonants and vowel sounds. Now, another writer, Daniel Defoe, wanted to establish an English academy, exclusive English academy, shorn of Latin and other things. Jonathan Swift, as my Lord has pointed out, he also shared the very same ideas of John Dryden and Daniel Defoe. But in due course of time, the legalese alone is not the area of attack. A general decadence has happened in the literature. Another great novelist, George Orwell, who is the author of Animal Farm and 1984. That 1984 is also more or less akin to our present condition. He is the first person to express his concern in his important essay called Politics and English Language in the year 1946. And many of his advices are relevant even today. And I'm going to devote an entire section on this. This important saying is, if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. See, his observations are as follows. English language becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish. But the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. He blames it on the laziness of our people. The point is that the process is reversible, but he gives us hope. Modern writing at its worst does not consist in picking out words for the sake of their meaning and inventing images in order to make the meaning clearer. It consists of merely putting together or gumming together long strips of words which have already been set in order by someone else and making the result presentable by sheer humbug. He in his own inimitable way, he has criticized this way of writing. And he goes on to say, modern English, especially written English, is full of bad habits which spread by imitation and which can be avoided if one is willing to take the necessary trouble. But the trouble we are not taking at all. If one gets rid of these habits, one can think more clearly, and to think clearly is a necessary first step so that the fight against bad English is not frivolous. And this is very important and is not the exclusive concern of professional writers alone. The attraction, he also says, the attraction to this way of writing is that it is easy, it is easier, even quicker once you have the habit to say, these are all the words which we commonly use. In my opinion, it is not an unjustified assumption than to say, I think. When you are composing in a hurry or when you are dictating to a stenographer, for instance, or making a public speech, it is natural to fall into such a pretentious Latinized style. Tags like, again, this is one sentence we all use very frequently, a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, or a conclusion to which all of us would readily assent, will save many a sentence from coming down with a bump. The bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation. He goes on again saying, imitation only, this is carried on. Even among people who should and do know better, the debased language that I have been discussing is in some ways very convenient. Phrases like a not unjustifiable assumption, leaves much to be desired, would serve no purpose, no good purpose, a consideration which we should do well to bear in mind, or all a continuous temptation, a packet full of aspirins. He comes again, but if thought corrupts language, language also can corrupt thought. A bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation, even among people who should know and do know better. The debased language that I have been discussing is in some ways very convenient. He is giving some 4 examples. I have given what is written in the original by the very professor and his comment. This is Professor Arol Lasky. If we can remember, we have read his books in the first year law course about political science.
Political science.
I am not indeed sure whether it is not true to say that the Milton who once seemed not unlike a 17th century Shelley had not become, out of an experience even more bitter in each year, more alien, that is the word he had used, to the founder of the Jesuit sect, which nothing could induce him to tolerate. And his comment is, Professor Lasky uses 5 negatives in 53 words. One of these is superfluous, making nonsense of the whole passage. And in addition, there is the slip, alien for akin, making further nonsense, and several avoidable pieces of clumsiness, which increase the general vagueness. See, I can even challenge anybody to read that, what is written by Professor Arol Lasky, and if they say, I have understood it completely at one go, I don't want to say anything about that person. Then this is Professor Lancelot Hogben. Above all, we cannot play ducks and drakes with the native battery of idioms which prescribes egregious collocations of vocables as the basic put up with for tolerate or put at a loss for bewilder. Now his commentary is, Professor Hogben plays ducks and drakes with a battery which is able to write prescriptions, and while disapproving the everyday phrases put up with, is unwilling to look egregious up in the dictionary and see what it means. But I have done that looking up part and said egregious means outstandingly bad. And this is one more essay on psychology in politics. Nobody can understand at one read. Then he says about, if one takes an uncharitable attitude towards it, it's simply meaningless. Probably one could work out its intended meaning by reading the whole of the article in which it occurs. Then fourth one is also the same thing. Now he says, each of these passages which we have read earlier has faults of its own. But quite apart from avoidable ugliness, two qualities are standing apart. That is, one is staleness of imagery. The other is lack of precision. The writer either has a meaning but cannot express, inadvertently say something else, or he is almost indifferent as to whether his word mean anything at all. This mixture of vagueness and sheer incompetence is the most marked characteristic of modern English prose. And he gives one example from Ecclesiastes. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. In modern English, it is the worst thing. Objective considerations of contemporary phenomena compel the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. Actually, the writer talks about luck, but look at the insidious way he spins so many words. And he says the whole tendency of modern prose is away from concreteness. Now, two sentences, the preceding one which you have the screencast, a little more closely. First contains 49 words, that is from Ecclesiastes, but only 60 syllables. But all its words are those of everyday life. The second contains 38 words of 90 syllables. 18 of those words are from Latin roots and one from Greek. The first sentence contains 6 vivid images. We can imagine that one person coming out and seeing under the sun, what are all he is seeing. And only one phrase, the time and chance, he says it is vague. The second contains not a single fresh arresting phrase, and in spite of its 90 syllables, it gives only a shortened version of the meaning contained in the first. Yet without a doubt, it is the second kind of sentence that is gaining ground in modern English. And he is giving one advice. A scrupulous writer in every sentence that he writes should ask himself at least 4 questions. That is, what am I trying to say? What words will express it? What image or idiom will make it clearer? Is this image fresh enough to have an effect? And 2 more he suggests. Could I put it more shortly, or have I said anything that is avoidably ugly? These advice, and he has also formulated certain rules. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. Never use a long word where a short one will do. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Never use the passive where you can use the active. This advice is more for the advocates. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outrightly barbarous. That is so far as the English as obtaining in the literature is concerned. But legal language remained insular till the middle of 70s in the 20th century. Plain English campaign then caught on. But in India, we should say little has been done. Because we are all, though exposed to Lord Denning right from our first year onwards, we could not see judges of his character in the judiciary. Now, the plain English movement, it started with organizations like the National Council of Teachers of English in the early 1970s, and they passed resolutions dealing with dishonest and inhumane uses of language and literature by advertisers, and semantic distortion by public officials, candidates for office, political commentators, and all those who transmit through the mass media. Originally, it is intended against this thing. Now, for example, UK launched its Plain English campaign in 1979 with a ritual shredding of government forms in Parliament Square. In large part, the Plain English movement attempted to narrow the rift. Actually, there was a gap between everyday public and its institutions with reference to positive changes in USA, England, Australia. One early advocate of Plain English campaign, Jan Mali, notes that the Plain English, plain language movement has made substantial progress in the simplification and reorganization of many business and government documents. This is what the shredding. This Chrissy is the person who started this movement. Outraged at the lack of progress on plain English, Chrissy officially launches Plain English campaign by shredding gobbledygook in Parliament Square, Westminster. The passing policeman, one interesting thing happened, that's what they are saying. A policeman tells the group they have to leave and reads out the relevant law, the Metropolitan Police Act. It was written in 1839 and it is filled with legalese and overly complicated sentences. And Chrissy translates it in the presence of journalists in plain English and say, does that gobbledygook means we have to go? Then she asks. Then she is dressed as a monster. She delivers few magazines, plain English magazines to 10 Downing Streets. Then we come to law. They say no other field than law encapsulates the problems of communicating both precisely and simply at the same time. Crystal is another advocate for plain English movement. He remarks that any campaign for plain English will find much of its fuel here. Laws need to be precise in order that individuals governed by these laws might know their legal rights and responsibilities. Yet in order to truly understand these rights and obligations, legal language must not confuse and confound its readers, but it is often the case. Now, what is our justification to this legalese? We generally argue that the convention and complexities of legal prose ensures that all possible contingencies are covered and ambiguities removed from documents on which legal decisions must rest. But critics reply that legalese makes lawyers necessary as interpreters as well as counselors. Therefore, they obscure the implications of contracts and other documents, and this worries the people unnecessarily. Now, the way forward is there are many tools now available. That is to help the plain English movement. They say many rich writing manuals have come in thing. Richard C. Wydick, Plain English for Lawyers, is one example. Though he does not touch substantive issues in jurisprudence, he rather explains principles of clear writing for those engaged in the legal process. Do not use lawyerism is one advice he gives. Words like aforementioned, my lord has already dwelt upon this thing, whereas res geste and hereinafter end up writing a legal smell while doing little to create meaning in the sentence structure. The meaning is the elusive concept here. Now, this is the opening words of his book. We lawyers do not write plain English. We use 8 words to say what could be said in 2. We use arcane phrases to express commonplace ideas. Seeking to be precise, we become redundant. Seeking to be cautious, we become verbose. Our statements, our sentences twist on and on, phrase within clause, glazing the eyes and numbing the minds of our readers. The result is a writing style that has, according to one critic, 4 outstanding characteristics. It is wordy, unclear, pompous, and dull. See, the guiding principles is our goal is to communicate and to make our reader's job very easy. So what would be essential for this thing is a shorter sentence than a longer one. Plain short words than long words. Because plain short words are easier to understand. Then we must use strong, precise verbs and minimizing the use of the verbs like is, or, was, and were. The one example is given. Jones is in agreement with Smith. But we can simply say Jones agrees with Smith. Writing, assuming or writing in active voice, that is, who has done what to whom. In this, if this structure is followed, everything will put in place, will fall into its place, and it will also convey the meaning very clearly. The active voice eliminates confusion by forcing you to name the actor in a sentence. The actor is made known. This construction makes clear to the reader who is to perform the duty. As I said, who is doing what to whom. Putting the actor before the verb forces us to think clearly and also about the casting of the responsibility. Some examples are given. The messenger will deliver the material. The contractor will decide the start date. The administrator must approve the figures. Here, the actor, the messenger, contractor, administrator are coming before the verbs will, must. So that you will know who is doing which action with what material. If we think of the passive voice, the material will be delivered. Invariably, the word or the question who will arise in our mind. The start date will be decided. Suppose we say in a passive way, or figures must be approved. By whom will be the question. Therefore, if we reverse this order in an active voice, it is very clear, it conveys the meaning. This is where I have stated the material will be delivered. The question that arises in our mind is by whom. The start date is to be decided by whom. The figures must be approved by whom. This comes. And this passive voice reverses the natural order, active order of English sentences. In the following passive example, the receiver of the action comes before the actor, as we have seen earlier. The regulation was written by the drafter. See, the receiver comes first, the verb next, then the actor. But it is not without its use also. It is appropriate when the actor is unknown, unimportant, or obvious. This does not usually apply in a regulatory, but in a regulatory text, you are not supposed to use this. Small items are often stolen. Unless you want to say your friend is a kleptomaniac, you can use this. The applications have been mailed. Okay, by whom it is? If it is mailed without packet posting, if it is mailed, okay. Then we have to apply chronology while presenting facts. The chronological order, the time order, if it is applied on the factual scenario, you will know what happened when. And also we have to order our material in a logical consequence or sequence. Then we have to keep the related matter also together. These are all the ideas or principles they are giving. Then simplifying wordy phrases of off. Jenkins had knowledge of the location of the printer ink. Instead of this, we can say Jenkins knew where the printer ink was. The judge avoided the mistake of confusing principles of restitution and of bailment. A lot could be saved by saying the judge did not confuse restitution and bailment. Here we are removing the off and we are simplifying the wordy phrases. Now on how we can cut off the unnecessary words. The example is the professional fees in this project are entirely dependent upon planning techniques that the client is in favor of implementing. It could be simply stated the project fees depend on the planning techniques the client favors. Then we can be direct in dealing. Talk directly to our readers. Use the imperative mood. Regulations lend themselves to this style, especially procedures, how-to instructions, and lists of duties. Directness avoids the passive voice. We can say sign all copies, attach a copy of your W2 to your return, because this style results in procedures that are shorter, crisper, and easier to understand. Now, positive way of writing is accentuated here. If we can accurately express an idea, either positively or negatively, but we must express it positively. And some examples are given. Don't say the governor may not appoint persons other than those qualified by the personnel management agency. We can say the governor must appoint a person qualified by the personnel management agency. Not appoint than those qualified. This not construction, this negative construction is avoided. A negative statement can be clear. Use it if you are cautioning the reader. Don't walk, don't smoke here. Those things we can accept. But avoid several negatives in one sentence. Don't say a demonstration project will not be approved, not is already come unless another negative. All application requirements are met. It could be easily stated as a demonstration project will be approved only if the applicant meets all requirements. Then I should say you must shun the shun. Turn ION words into verbs whenever you can. Simplify wordy phrases. Watch out for the word. Off we have already seen. The realization of human rights requires. Instead we can say human rights, realizing human rights requires. The implementation of EU directives involves. Instead we can say implementing EU directives involves. The parties will continue in negotiations until. We can say the parties will continue negotiating until. Then action verbs, nominals. Give consideration to. We can simply say consider. It is applicable to. We can rather say applies to. Make payment. Simply we can say pay. Give recognition to. Say recognize. Is concerned with. Simply can be put as concerns. Like that, these are all negatives. Then consistency. I don't want to take much of your time. Then we can shun off all needless words. because of the fact that we can simply say as since, call your attention to the fact that we remind you for the period of, we can simply say for, in many cases, often could be stated, in many instances, sometimes would replace that. In the nature of, we can use like that, we can go on. Then avoiding the redundancies. My Lord has stated any and all, authorize and direct, cease and desist. These are all, one is from the French, another one is from the Latin or English. Then noun sandwiches. See, this is what I wanted to say. During medieval period, lawyers always used an admixture of Latin, French and English. This is primarily to avoid ambiguity. They use this pair of words from two different languages. They wanted to give more emphasis, but it has become a stylistic habit. We still use today also, making and entering, fit and proper. These are all English and French, lands and tenements, will and testament. A testament is a Latin one, English and Latin. Then aid and abet, these are all the famous doublets we still use, null and void, part and parcel, give and grant, keep and maintain, cease and desist. Triplets, will, direct or construct, cost, charges and expenses, place, install or fix, rest, residue or remainder, give, devise or bequest. Now, writing short sentences is accentuated here. Readable sentences are simple, active, affirmative and declarative. More a sentence deviates from this structure, the harder the sentence is to understand. Long run-on sentences are basic weakness in legal documents, but we are committing the same mistakes again and again. Legal documents often contain conditions which result in complex sentences with many clauses. More the complex, the greater the possibility for difficulty in determining the actual intended meaning of the sentence. A writer may improve the clarity of a regulation by using short, compact paragraphs. Now we have seen sentences, now we are paragraphs. Each paragraph should deal with a single unified topic. Lengthy, complex or technical discussion should be presented in a series of related paragraphs. The omission of unnecessary words, and the sentence should contain not even 20, 12. 12 would be the ideal sentence contents of the words in a sentence. So that we have to break long sentences up into short ones, because readability declines past 13 words. 70 words are all extremely unreadable. Here we are pruning some sentences. The council sent an inspector who made observations as to the condition of the pavement and concluded that it was uneven. Now see, it could be stated in two simple sentences. The council sent an inspector to inspect the pavement. She concluded it was uneven. In considering the law applicable to judicial review, one must always bear in mind the propriety of unelected officials. He is referring to judges who lack expertise in the administration of finite resources, substituting their own view of the merits of a particular claim for that of more experienced, in practical sense, administrative decision makers. See, this we have cut short into, or rather split into so many sentences. Judges must be cautious in judicial review cases. They are not elected and have no experience in administrative decision making. In particular, they have no experience of making decisions that involve allocating limited government funds. Judges should not therefore simply substitute their own views or preferences for those of the decision makers. Now, we have merely cut down the earlier paragraph into simpler sentences for the sake of clarity and understandability. Now, I have picked out one particular paragraph from the judgment. In the wake of the aforesaid, we are unable to record our concurrence with the submissions made in support of the appeal that the arbitrator can be termed to be a court within the meaning of section 195 of the Criminal Procedure Code. As such, question of applicability of section 340 CRPC in a proceeding before the arbitrator does not and cannot arise. The issue thus is answered in the negative. The appeal therefore fails and is dismissed. No order as to cost. Such a long sentences can be stated in this way. We do not agree with the submission that arbitrator is a court, and therefore both sections 195 and 340 CRPC do not apply. Hence we dismiss the appeal, but no costs. Then what is the solution? We must try to state only one thing and one thing in each sentence. Divide long sentences into 2 or 3 short sentences. Removing all unnecessary words and striving for a simple sentence with a subject and verb, and eliminating all unnecessary modifiers, we can achieve this simplicity. If only 1 or 2 simple conditions must be met before a rule applies, state the conditions first and then state the rule. If 2 or more complex conditions must be met before a rule applies, state the rule first and then state the conditions. If several conditions or subordinate provisions must be met before a rule applies, we have to preferably use a list. Then a reply in legalis I have taken. This. Attention, Mr. Krishnan, advocate. This firm and in particular the undersigned have been instructed to act on behalf of Mr. Ram in relation to the matter set out in the subject or captioned above. During our initial conference with him, Mr. Ram had forwarded to us a copy of your notice issued on 31st May 2020 and received by him on 2nd June 2020, which we are presently reviewing. Following completion of our review and consideration and the taking of further instructions from Mr. Ram, we will revert to you by way of further correspondence. See, in simple English, this could be, Dear Krishnan, we act for Ram. We have a copy of your letter dated 31st May 2020 and will respond shortly. Truly yours. Lawyer for plain English. And our judgment is unreadable or uncomprehensible. See, this batch of writ petitions preferred under Article 32 of the Constitution of India exposits cavil in its quintessential conceptuality and percipient discord between venerated and exalted right of freedom of speech and expression of individual, exploring manifold and multi-layered, unbounded and unfettered spectrums and the controls, restrictions and constrictions under the assumed power of reasonableness ingrained in the statutory provisions relating to criminal law to reviver and uphold one's reputation. See, in order to comprehend this particular first sentence alone, you need to know the meanings of these words. Cavil, complain, quintessential, essential or ideal, percipient, perceptive or observant, exalted. All these words are used in the earlier judgment. So now about some practical tips to a lawyer is a great way of stating fact is to stick to the most relevant facts, glean the same from the records, separating the chaff from the grain, and one must state undisputed facts first, then tread the more troubled waters of making a finding on the disputed ones. And clarity is paramount in facts-intensive matters. The narration of facts must keep the readers of facts hooked. Evoking visual imagery is a must. I am going to cite few examples. See, Brian A. Garner is another a great man who advocated simple English. It is impossible to separate good writing from clear thinking. That's what he has stated. And this is Antonin Scalia's opening statement. As I read, you can easily evoke some visual imagery in your mind. The videotape tells quite a different story. There we see respondent's vehicle racing down narrow two-lane roads in the dead of night at speeds that are shockingly fast. We see it swerve around more than a dozen other cars, cross the double yellow line, and force cars traveling in both directions to their respective shoulders to avoid being hit. We see it run multiple red lights and travel for considerable periods of time in the occasional center left turn only lane. Chased by numerous police cars, forced to engage in the same hazardous maneuvers just to keep up. Far from being the cautious and more closely resembles a Hollywood-style car chase of the most frightening sort, placing police officers and innocent bystanders alike at great risk of serious injury. This is culled out from Scott versus Harris. This is of a recent origin, 2007 judgment. See, it vividly brings to our mind the hot pursuit due to the words employed by the great judge. This is the action brought by the plaintiff who sustained grievous injuries as his vehicle was hit by the police vehicle. And Judge Scalia was ruling in that case, and he has virtually transported us to that scenario, that incident, and he is very graphic, concise, and beautifully told everything. And he has not used any Latin words, he has not used any complicated sentence structures. In simple, short sentences, pithy sentences, he has conveyed entire meaning. And this is unfortunately lacking. This is Lord Denning's narrative. He says it happened on April 19, 1964. First, he has stated the time. It was bluebell time in Kent. Bluebell is a kind of a flower. It used to blossom in that time, April time. Mr. and Mrs. Hinz had been married some 10 years and they had 4 children, all aged 9 and under. The youngest one was 1. Mrs. Hinz was a remarkable woman. In addition to her own 4, she was foster mother to 4 other children. To add to it, she was 2 months pregnant with her 5th child. On this day, they drove out in a Bedford Dormobile van from Tonbridge to Canberra Island. They took all 8 children with them. As they were coming back, they returned into a lay-by to have a picnic tea. The husband, Mr. Hinz, was at the back of the Dormobile making tea. Mrs. Hinz had taken Stephanie, her 3rd child, aged 3, across the road to pick bluebells on the opposite side. There came along a Jaguar car driven by Mr. Berry, out of control. The tire had burst. The Jaguar rushed into this lay-by and crashed into Mr. Hinz and the children. Mr. Hinz was frightfully injured and died a little later. Nearly all the children were hurt. Blood was streaming from their heads. Mrs. Hinz, hearing the crash, turned around and saw this disaster. She ran across the road and did all she could. Her husband was beyond recall, but the children recovered. An action has been brought on her behalf and on behalf of the children for damages against Mr. Berry, the defendant. The injuries to the children have been settled by various sums being paid. The pecuniary loss to Mrs. Hinz by reason of the loss of her husband had been founded by the judge to be some 115,000 pounds. But there remains the question of the damages payable to her for nervous shock, that is the shock which she suffered by seeing her husband lying in a road dying, and the children strewn around. See, these small pithy sentences conveys the meaning in a very clear manner. It not only conveyed the meaning, it has narrated the entire event and also the legal problems that he is set out to unravel. Such is the quality of his writing. Then another great Benjamin Cardosa. Look at his way of narrating. All these 3 persons or 3 great judges have an outstanding quality of narrating in simple sentences. We shall see this one. Plaintiff was standing on a platform of defendant's railroad after buying a ticket to go to Rockaway Beach. A train stopped at the station, bound for another place. 2 men ran forward to catch it. One of the men reached the platform of the car without mishap. though the train was already moving. The other man carrying a package jumped aboard the car but seemed unsteady as if about to fall. A guard on the car who had held the door open reached forward to help him in, and another guard on the platform pushed him from behind. In this act, the package was dislodged and fell upon the rails. It was a package of small size, about 15 inches long, and was covered by newspaper. In fact, it contained fireworks, but there was nothing in its appearance to give notice of its contents. The fireworks, when they fell, exploded. The shock of the explosion threw down some scales at the other end of the platform, many feet away. The scales struck the plaintiff, causing injuries for which see sues. Again, I need not dwell much on this thing. What is the entire case has been encapsulated in this single paragraph. So such is the quality. And we must emulate them at any cost. Though any attempt would be little too much to expect, but we must strive hard to emulate their writing. See, these are all from our own literature. It's not that our literature is lagging. சொல்லுக சொல்லை பிரிதோர் சொல் அச்சொல்லை வெல்லும் சொல் இன்மை அறிந்து. In these 7 words, our திருவள்ளுவர் has stated, நாம என்ன சொல்ல நினைக்கிறோமோ அந்த சொல்ல வேற ஒரு சொல்லு வெல்லக்கூடாது அப்படின்னு தெரிஞ்ச பிறகுதான் சொல்ல வேண்டும் அப்படின்னு சொல்றார். இன்னொன்னு, சொலல் வல்லன் சோர்விலன் அஞ்சான் அவனை இகழ் வெல்லல் யாருக்கும் அரிது. ஒரு சொல்வன்மை உடையவன் அந்த சொல்ற சொல்ல ஒரு சோர்வை காட்டாதவர், சபைக்கு அஞ்சாதவர் ஆகிய ஒருவரை பேச்சில் வெல்வது என்பது எல்லாருக்கும் ஒரு கடினமான ஒரு செயல் அப்படின்னு சொல்றார். விரைந்து தொழில் கேட்கும் ஞாலம் நிறந்து இனிது சொல்லுதல் வல்லார் பெறின். ஒரு கருத்தை ஒரு கோர்வையாக கோர்த்து இனிய முறையில் சொல்வதற்கு வல்லவர்களை பெற்றால் இவ்வுலகம் அவர்கள் சொல்வதை கேட்டு விரைந்து தொழில் செய்யும். அதே மாதிரி கட்டிங் டவுன் எக்ஸ்ட்ரா வேர்ட்ஸ் பத்தி சொல்ல, பல சொல்ல காமுறுவர் மன்றம் மாசற்ற சில சொல்லல் தேற்றாதவர். குறைவில்லாத சில சொற்களாலே தம் கருத்தை விலக்கி சொல்வதற்கு அறியாதவர்களே பல சொற்களை சொல்வதற்கு எப்போதும் விரும்புவார்கள். Look at the words used by the judges, Antonin Scalia, be it Cardoza or be it Lord Denning, as though they are conforming themselves to this rule stated by 2000 years back by our own Valluvar. Then closer on we have a 12th century grammarian by name Pavanandi Adigal. He has written one grammar text called Nannul. It says what a text should contain and should not contain. 10 things which should be avoided in a text. He says Kundra Kural, Migaipada Kural, Pumiyadu Kural, Marugola Kural, Valichol Punarthal, Mayanga Vaital, Vetrana Toduthal, Matrundru Virithal, Sendru Theindhu Irudhal, Nindru Payaninmai, Endrivai, Iraim Kutram Nurke. Iraimna 2 5s, 10 குற்றம். குன்றக்கூறல் அப்படின்னா குறித்த பொருளை விளக்குவதற்கு வேண்டும் சொற்களில் குறைவுபட சொல்லுதலும். மிகைப்பட கூறல் எக்ஸ்ட்ரா சொல்றது, எக்ஸாஜரேட் பண்றது. கூறியது கூறல் டாட்டாலஜி, சொன்னதையே திருப்பி திருப்பி சொல்லிட்டு இருக்கிறது. மாறுகொள கூறல் சொல்றது ஒண்ணு, அது புரிந்து கொள்வது வேறு ஒன்றாக ஆகுவது. வலுச்சொல் புணர்த்தல், நல்ல சொற்களை தேர்ந்தெடுத்து பயன்படுத்தணும் அப்படின்னு சொல்றது. மற்றொன்று வரித்தல், சொல்ல வந்ததை விட்டுட்டு வேற ஒண்ணு சொல்றது. சென்று தேய்ந்து இரிதல், ஃபர்ஸ்ட் நல்லா ஆரம்பிச்சுட்டு கடைசியில தேஞ்சு கழுத கட்டு குட்டிச்சோறு ஆறா மாதிரி பண்றது. நின்று பயனின்மை, இதனால ஒரு யூஸும் ஆகாம போறது. இது எல்லாமே 10 குற்றங்கள் அவர் சொல்றார். 10 அழகுன்னு என்ன சொல்றாருன்னா, சுருங்க சொல்லல், விளங்க வைத்தல், நவின்றோர்க்கு இனிமை, நன்மொழி புணர்த்தல், ஓசையுடைமை, ஆழமுடைத்தாதல், முறையின் வைப்பு, உலகம் அலையாமை, விழுமியது பயத்தல், விலங்கு உதாரணத்து ஆகுதல், நூலிற் கழகெனும் 10 அப்படின்னு சொல்ற. சுருக்கமா சொல்றது, சொல்ல வந்ததை சுருக்கமா சொல்லிட்டு போறது, சொற்களை வீண் பண்ணாம இருக்கிறது. சுருங்க சொல்லி நிறைய விஷயங்களை விளங்க வைக்கிறது, வாசிப்பவர்களுக்கும் கேட்பவர்களுக்கும் ஒரு இன்பத்தை கொடுக்கணும், நல்ல சொற்களை உபயோகப்படுத்தணும், நல்ல இன்பம் சந்தம் கொண்டு சில சொற்களை செயல்படுத்தணும், ஆழ்ந்த கருத்துக்களை சொல்லணும், ஒரு உலகத்துக்கு ஒத்து வராத விஷயங்களை சொல்லாம இருக்கிறது, உயர்ந்தவர்களோட வழக்கத்துக்கு மாறு கொள்ளாம சொல்றது, சிறந்த பொருளை தருது, நல்ல நல்ல எக்ஸாம்பிள்ஸ் உதாரணங்களை கொடுத்து அழகு சேர்க்கிறது. இது எல்லாமே இந்த 10 விஷயங்கள் ஒரு நூலுக்கு அழகாகும் அப்படின்னு சொல்றாரு. So now one general thing is, we have been successful in keeping at bay one important stakeholder, that is our clients, from understanding what is being done on his behalf. It is our clients who are the ultimate consumers of not only our own pleadings but also the judgments of our courts. And he is remaining clueless and oblivious to the entire process. Therefore, it should be an onerous task on us to make him understand as to what we are doing for him, and it is lying on our shoulders very heavily. And in order to achieve that lofty goal, writing in a very comprehensible manner is the first step. Youngsters enna sollamna, let them use these 4 C's: clear, correct, concise and complete manner. Let them try to write sentences in this manner. Let them avoid jargon, and understandable way. If they write, they can achieve. Then there is one small snippet. The common language of law is not the product of necessity, precedent, convention or economy, but it is the product of sloth, laziness, confusion, hurry, cowardice, ignorance, neglect and cultural poverty. This is a statement made by Judge Lynn and Hughes, US Court. Plain language is or should be every bit as accurate and precise as traditional legal writing. It is considerably clearer. It is usually shorter and faster. It is strongly preferred by readers. It would be greatly improve the image of lawyers. This is what Professor Kimball has stated while answering the critics of plain language. Now on Blaise Pascal letter, he says, the letter I have written today is longer than usual because I lacked the time to make it shorter. So spend some time with your text, make it understandable, strike out whatever that are unnecessary so that it achieves that clarity. Then William Penn has stated like this: speak properly and in as few words as you can, but always plainly, for the end of speech is not ostentation but to be understood. The shorter and the plainer, the better. With this, I conclude my screencast, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rajendra Kumar. I don't believe in flattery. I don't believe in exaggerations. But I would rather say that this session has become to be one of the, what I would say that very useful and utility-oriented session. Not meant for just like what is called ornamental or for the sake of doing a lecture. As Mr. Jagdish Chandra has initially told, we should strive to do something in the sense of legalizing the legal language, but not compromising on the quality of the language we use. Otherwise, we will be ending in committing a sin. With these few words, I request the comparator Lakshmi Prasanna to offer her words. Lakshmi, please.
Yes, sir. MMBA and SSR Law Office acknowledges the presence of Honorable Mr. Justice G. Jayachandran, Honorable Mr. Justice J. R. Swaminathan, and Honorable Justice Vimala, former Judge of Madras High Court and member of Tamil Nadu State Law Commission. Now I pass in the forum to Srinivasa Raman, sir.
I would request Justice Jagdish Chandra to offer a few words before going to the formal end of the process.
So now we are in a stage where we are doing our proceedings through video conferencing, and we don't have time also. So before we argue something, it is better we decide what we are going to speak, so that we can save a lot of time. Like our friend SRK said, cost, charges and expenses. I only remember the phrase in Tamil. There used to be a priest in a temple and he used to give accounts to the trustee of the temple. And generally it used to go more, and when they ask him, what happened, why you are asking for so much money, he used to say, Poo, Pushpam and Malar, moonu vaangna. Adanala. So it is like, unless Poo, Pushpam and Malar, they are the same thing. And you are using all these three words, cost, charges and expenses. And now we are in a day where we will have to shorten our arguments, and our words should be straight and without beating around the bush. Straight away come to the point, so that we can save the time of the court as well as the time of your colleagues. Yes, I thank my elder brother, Brother Prakash, Brother Jayachandran and Sister Vimala for participating in this session. And I used to think that Brother Prakash is the Indian Antonin Scalia. I used to admire my brother's judgments. So it will be very straight, just create an interest in the judgment. Am I right, Mr. Rajendra Prasad?
Absolutely, my lord. Absolutely, because he used to say, on a complaint filed so and so. So he creates an interest right from the very first word go.
And at the same time, I also admire the writings of my brother G.R. Swaminathan also. He is also yet another Benjamin Cardosa in our court now.
Short and sweet.
Yes.
Yes. May I request Lakshmi Prasanna to say a few words?
Sir, thank you, sir, for such an enlightening speech. We as budding lawyers need all these tips and things what you have shared with us today. It is a basic thing for lawyers to draft the pleadings. So, for example, you have taught us how we have to write in a chronological order, sequence and related matters where we have to avoid the needless words. It was very useful, and we are fortunate to have you here in this webinar this evening.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
I think Brother Prakash wants to speak something.
Yes, sir. I'll just find out. You're welcome, sir.
Jagdish was very right when he said the trying moments. Very encouraging words were spoken by Jagdish. And of course, Rajendra Kumar, I mean, we have been knowing for the last 30-40 years. Rajendran, the only thing is that, speech is evolutionary, writing is not evolutionary. That's the biggest problem. Evolutionary scientists say that writing is acquired skill. And it came along with the invention of money. So the problem is writing and money have got a great thing. A very parsimonious, stingy fellow will use very stingy words. See, that's what it is interpreted normally. That's the truth of it. But I'd always had one doubt, Rajendra Kumar, which I wanted to ask you. Are you there?
Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord.
I always wanted to know the pronunciation of the word CONNOISSEUR. It's a French word. How do you pronounce it, Rajendra Kumar?
The OI is always pronounced as va. The repertoire, though it is REPERTOIRE, we say it as repertoire. Like that connoisseur, there are two pronunciations. One is connoisseur, converser.
Converser. Okay. Thank you, Rajendra. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. May I request Hema Sampathsin, advocate, to offer a few words? Hema, ma'am.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to tell the youngsters one thing. They use Word and they type their own pleadings. Word itself keeps suggesting, one word for 3 words or 4 words. I find it very disconcerting because I think suddenly maybe I'm making an English mistake, but then it shortens your sentences. So best thing to do is to keep watching the word corrections offered by Word when you're typing. Next thing is, I want to say that verbosity in pleadings is to an extent judge-made, because the first plaint in the Madras High Court Museum has only 10 sentences. It's a pro-note plaint, and it has only 10 sentences. But slowly, we are asked, why did you not say this in the plaint? We are asked to give the evidence. We are asked to give all the details in the plaint. Whatever should be given at the time of evidence is also to be pleaded. So the plaints have become very long. I think judges should curtail this verbosity in pleadings, because they should not ask for these things. That I find from long practice in the appellate side, that the appellate judge always says, you have not stated so in the plaint. things which need not be stated in the plaint. Then one more thing is, for example, with great respect, when you read Judgment of Justice Krishna Iyer, it takes you 2 or 3 readings to find out what is stated in the judgment. So simple English has to be there both in the judgments as well as in the pleadings and arguments. Then one more thing which was not touched upon is Tamil legalese. So now lower courts write their judgments in Tamil, and there's a move to ask the high courts also to make Tamil as an alternative additional language. And Tamil should incorporate English words, because there are no words for certain legal words, like mandatory injunction. We have coined a word, Nirandara Sayaluruthu Kattalai, which I think is not understandable to even a Tamil.
No, it is not Sayaluruthu Kattalai. It is mandatory, it is Valiyuruthu Kattalai.
And then Nirandara Sayaluruthu Kattalai. In Tamil up to school level, Tamil was my second language. I speak Tamil and I write Tamil very well. But even then, I have not found these words in my long years. So I feel those who are touting for Tamil as language in court should also learn to adopt certain English words which are known to everybody in the road. Every client who comes to my office, most of them are Mofassal clients, and they know these words. So from experience, I feel that judges should see when drafting Tamil words, they should learn to use English words. Then one thing is, because Honorable High Court judges are here, the OS rules in the Madras High Court, they have to be made simpler. They use words which are not known to anyone nowadays, and the forms and the annexures also need a radical simplification, and redundant words are there, and so those things have to be simplified. That's been a long pending thing which nobody wants to touch upon. The rules committees, I think the learned judges should insist on that going to the original
my brother, Dr. Jayachandran, who is in the rules committee, is also present here. I think he will take note of it.
Please. I'm sure if he goes through the OS rules, he'll find that you need to cut it short. The last one which I want to say is the decree drafting. We get second appeals disposed of, but the decree is not made available if you want to execute because of the verbosity in the decree. The section staff, I have known them personally to complain about that. They don't have the time or the energy to draft a decree. If your lordships, I think, may not be looking at Madras High Court decrees, I think kindly you should pay attention to drafting of decrees so that the executing court as well as the advocates. See, by the time you come to the actual decretal portion, there are several mistakes in the decree portion. So it's very difficult for us to get it corrected. And definitely redundant words like last will and testament and things like that, they have to be omitted. And youngsters should definitely learn to write simple English and not verbosity and spelling, punctuation. I think as judges, I'm sure you are distracted by the mistakes in the pleadings. So I feel they should mind their English because the computer is very helpful in this regard and it corrects our English. So when there's a correction shown in the computer, when you're typing it, like for example, you don't put the capital letter for words, or you put capitals for wrong words, or verbs and nouns are interchanged. So I'm sure with all your guidance and the 2 good lectures which we heard today, all of us have stood to gain. But I'm requesting all your lordships to kindly attend to the original side rules and AS rules, which are giving us trouble every day as practicing lawyers. Thank you very much for the opportunity given.
Thank you, ma'am. You have hit on the nail. As the common English adage says, charity begins at home. You rather said the brevity begins at the court.
Yes, sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we are coming to the end of this session. May I request Mr. Sibi to hand over the floor. Sibi, you are welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, sir, for roping me into this vote of thanks for this day. And now we have come to the final last part of the program. And indeed, in fact, it is the last program of the English Literary Club Committee's lecture series, which is we are the 5th series. That is the last thing. And as the chairman of this English Literary Committee said, when this term legalize was brought forward for the fifth lecture series. In fact, we all had appraising eyebrows there in the library in our association, where we had one of my colleagues who was sitting right next to me was asking, what is the meaning of legalize? I said, try to Google it, man. It's like, it's there in the Google. Then he typed it in the Google, and the Cambridge dictionary said, it's a language used by lawyers and in legal documents, and that is difficult for ordinary people to even understand. Then I turned to him and said, you're not an ordinary man. It's high time that you should know at least the word legalize. So it's high time that we, as a lawyers, should be conversant with the legalized terms, which we might have be using it in a situation where it is needed. As rightly said by the our lordships, that it should not create any more complexity. It should be rather used in a very simplest way to render justice. And in fact, it was a very remarkable speech by your Lordship Justice Jagdish Chandra. In fact, both the resource person and the chief guest of today took us to the time travel. In fact, I had my oldest days of my first year of history of courts, then the legal language, then the jurisprudence, and so more to go. In fact, I went through the first year subjects in a very short span of time. And in fact, everybody in this group, this Zoom call would have gone through the entire sessions of the first year subjects. And thanks a lot. We went through the era, pre-era, and medieval, French and English, and in fact, it's very knowledge enriching program today. And as I said, the legalize, as you all pointed out, is the communication design. Just like how the medical doctors would say that surgical skills, that legalize is just like as a communication design, both was a drafting and a skill. And what the chief guest and the research person has emphasizes that we should not lose the majesty of court and the law and justice. Just that we should be attached with this, yes, but with the simplified terms of the legalized words. To avoid the complex legalized words and to have the simple legalized words would be a better thing. And thanks for the enriching thing which you have shared. And it was a very thought-provoking and very remarkable speech by both all the people here. And thank you so much. And thank you. Though my words may not be capable of communicating our sense of gratitude, but still, I take this opportunity to thank for the one and all the present. Today we are having the Senior Advocate Hema Sampath, Om Prakash, Sir, Your Lordship Justice J.R. Swaminathan here, Your Lordship Justice Vimla J is here, Lordship Justice P.N. Prakash is here, and everybody over here. It's really a very welcoming thing to us, and it's a very encouraging thing as a part of the English Literary Committee. Thanks a lot. Thanks one and all. Stay home, stay safe for the Corona period. Thank you, Lord. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Subhi, for the meaningful vote of thanks. With this, we come to the end of the session, and MMBA English Literary Committee is happy to having arranged this. See you in some other program. I'm signing off. Thank you, everybody.